Hi, my name is Sam, and what you're about to listen to is an interview I did recently with Sanah Ahsan, who is a poet and a trainee clinical psychologist who has just finished her thesis on whiteness in clinical psychology. In the interview you're about to hear, she talks about her experience working on BBC's Performance Live, The Way Out, winning the Outspoken Prize 2019 for her poem My Dua Is Love, and her experience of whiteness in mental health and how that is impacting coronavirus in the UK. I really hope you enjoy the interview. It was done very ad hoc over the phone, so you can hear some typing noises, but I really hope you enjoy what she has to say. It sounds kind of creepy, but I've kind of been stalking you for the last hour. in a very flattering, preparing for the interview, but also deeply interested way. Because you have done so many cool things, and I want to talk about as many of them as possible.
Sure.
But first things first, could you just introduce yourself to our readers?
Yes, sure, I can. So my name's Sanah Ahsan. I'm a trainee clinical psychologist, a poet, a reporter, and I've also done lots of different bits of community work and media work, so presenting for Channel 4 as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a queer Pakistani Muslim woman. I guess that kind of summarises it.
Cool, yes, thank you. So I guess the first thing to talk about, and kind of the reason that Ariane emailed in the first place, was The Way Out.
Yes.
So would you mind telling me a bit about it?
Yeah, sure. So it was just a really incredible thing to be a part of. I was one of the performances that the main character finds on this journey of self-discovery. Mm-hmm. She goes on to the Battersea Art Centre, which is a really stunningly beautiful building.
Yeah.
So just performing in that space was just such a privilege. And yeah, it was a bit surreal, to be honest, because the bit that I was in has these incredible stained windows on the top. And yeah, we had one of my friends was the pianist that was accompanying my piece, and it was just it was just really surreal and incredibly beautiful. So yeah, that was my part in it, was being one of the performances that the main character finds along her way.
Yeah.
But it was all something very new for me because the whole thing was filmed in one shot.
Wow.
Which is kind of crazy. So you don't actually get to see any of the other performances whilst you're doing it. So I didn't get to see any of the other performers. You're just sort of there waiting in your bit.
Yeah.
And the whole thing gets taken over. We did 3 whole things, as in the whole thing shot in one go, but we did that 3 times.
Wow.
But yeah, you kind of just have to get it right.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of pressure on it, but also just really fun and a really beautiful thing to be a part of. And I think Suri did a really great job with kind of taking on such a massive task creatively to film so many different performers in one go, and did really well with it. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed doing it. And the piece that I did was called Come As You Are, which is one of my poems really rooted in the importance of self-acceptance and
mm-hmm.
self-compassion and self-love, which is just key things that I'm thinking about a lot and speak to a lot in my poetry.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I have watched it, and it is a beautiful piece.
Thank you.
And just, I find it really interesting that you have a pianist accompanying you. And obviously, there are a lot of links in many ways between poetry and music. But for you, what is that connection, and why do you decide to have music with your poetry?
Oh, that's a big question. I think what Sam brings to it is just really, really brings the piece alive. And there's a really, for me, in terms of the emotive undertone, the music in itself carries a completely different message and language. And I think coming together with what I'm offering in terms of spoken word and language and the emotions that are carried through in the musicality behind it, combined, bring something beyond what I can just deliver in just the words, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sam is incredibly talented, and actually how we did that piece was completely improvised.
Wow.
So we sat together and I literally just shared the poem, and Sam just was responding to it initially for what came up for him as he was hearing everything. So it's very much like an improvised piece, and kind of just like birthed creatively in the moment. So yeah, I think what Sam brings to it is incredibly valuable.
That's amazing. I can only dream of having such talent. Cool. So, and that was with Omid Jalili, I saw, and Caleb Femi, who I'm pretty sure Caleb Femi came to my school.
Okay, cool.
I just recognised the name.
Yeah.
But what was it like?
Yeah, he's a great poet.
What was it like working with all these other amazing kind of role models and poets and artists?
Yeah, pretty surreal, really cool. I was like, as a young person, watched Omid Jalili's like stand up when I was really, really young. The whole thing was a bit mad, really, because obviously I'm performing and then he just walks through.
Yeah.
And it's kind of threw me. I'm not gonna lie, I'm just a bit starstruck in the middle of the piece. No, he's very like humble, very down to earth, really lovely guy. We both got talking actually about TED Talks because he did one and so did I. This year, so we were both kind of just kind of reflecting on what that experience was like. So yeah, that was really cool, and that's just being Caleb and working with a poet that I admire really deeply is just a real privilege, and I feel like even just talking to Caleb, but just being around Caleb and hearing his poetry, watching him do his thing I'm always learning from him. He's an incredible artist, and just quite experienced, I think, and has a lot of wisdom to share in terms of his experiences. So I love talking to him and I love learning from him.
Nice, and that's a lovely segue into your TED Talk,
Sure.
which I have also watched, which is so, like, I find it so inspiring, and, like, personally I have been on my own journey of self-love over recent years, and I know, like, as a young woman how difficult that can be, although my perspective is as a white girl, so there are a lot of differences. But could you just kind of explain to our readers a little bit about your TED Talk and what kind of brought you to get there and to do it?
Sure. I think for me, it was a really... I'm just thinking about what because there's a lot in that TED Talk.
Yes.
And I think I would encourage people to go to actually watch it, because I feel like the different concepts that I'm trying to communicate in it. But specifically, I think it was trying to share how meaningful poetry has been for me as a form of action in demonstrating self-love demonstrating love to myself through action.
Yeah.
And I think really trying to communicate as a woman of colour, as a queer Pakistani woman, being on receipt of a lot of shameful narratives, and really internalising that, how much work it takes to shift that, so that you're not speaking to yourself with this, punitive voice, or very self-critical voice that we often adopt, from people that project those onto us, and how significant poetry has been for me in rewriting some of that, and speaking to myself with more love. But I specifically wanted to communicate in that piece how many challenges are faced specifically for women of colour, in that who are on receipt of, I guess, just a lot of shaming narratives and being constantly told that our bodies aren't valued in the same ways as our white counterparts. And I think cultivating and practicing that message of self-love takes significantly more work. And I think there's a lot to kind of say about that process for me personally.
Yeah.
And poetry has been really key in that journey for me.
Sure. Cool.
But yeah, I share a few poems in that piece, in that talk as well, which was really cool to try and intersperse, like trying to deliver a talk on a topic whilst also kind of sharing creative poetry in between it. So that was a journey for sure. But yeah, I shared some poems in that as well to kind of demonstrate what that process has been like for me.
And one of those, the last one was the Dua of Love.
My Dua is Love.
Sorry, that one, yes. Which you won the Outspoken Prize for last year?
Yes, I have. Yeah, I did. Do you want me to just say a bit about that piece, or?
And also a bit about the prize and kind of what it was like to receive that for kind of a poem that clearly meant quite a lot.
Yeah. Oh, it was such a surprise. I mean, I think I found it a real surprise. I didn't expect to be shortlisted, let alone to win it, to be completely honest with you. And I think, like, the reality of the creative world, but also just all successful industries, it's a bit of a bubble and quite hard to get into.
Yeah.
So for me, just having that acknowledgement of my writing, especially of something that was so close to my heart, and that piece is very much about me negotiating being a Muslim woman, but also being queer.
Yeah.
And being able to go on a loving journey with myself, but also with God through that process. It's a piece really close to my heart. So I think being recognised for that is, of course, just a real blessing. So I just feel really grateful for it, and I think it meant it opened certain doors for me, and just gave me great opportunities. And I think what it signifies is the importance, I think. So at the same time, as much as I'm very grateful for that opportunity, I think there's a side to me that wishes that there was more recognition of voices that are less heard.
Yeah.
You know, being a Muslim Pakistani woman, I think there are other writers, creatives that also have important things to share, that are also Muslim, but also women of colour, that aren't getting that platform as much as they should be. And I think I'm very grateful to have that, but I'm also kind of advocating and hoping that more voices are heard and given that platform.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I know that you've done like a lot of work with like various organisations like Childline and is it Jawab?
Yeah.
So like obviously there's a lot that you're trying to do for kind of Pakistani women and Muslim women and children nationally. Could you just tell our readers a little bit about like what work you're doing with those organisations?
Sure. So things have gone a little bit quieter, but I've done work with Childline on different things actually, both talking about how we can use poetry and writing and creative expression more broadly as a form of healing in terms of mental health and managing our emotions and managing our distress, and how important creative expression is as a tool for that.
Yeah.
I've also done pieces with Childline around coming out, or however you understand that to be, but I guess the process of accepting and coming to acceptance of yourself and others around your sexuality.
Yeah.
And what that's been like for me, specifically around managing faith and coming from a religious family. So I've done work with Childline around that. I think with Jawab, they're a grassroots organisation that do lots of different work around broadly tackling like xenophobia and Islamophobia. So I've done lots of different things with them, from writing and poetry to also facilitating and leading workshops around Islamophobia or different things. So how masculinity is perceived in Islam, and we do lots of different things working with young Muslims with that organisation. So that's just some of the bits. But my main hat that I wear is working as a trainee psychologist and doing a lot around mental health more specifically. So I've just recently worked with the South Bank Centre and Women of the World Festival around doing a sold-out event on women of colour's mental health. And what underpins that is, I guess, my work and my research on deconstructing whiteness in clinical psychology. So I'm doing a lot of thinking around race and mental health, race and racism and mental health.
And am I correct that you've just finished your thesis on that?
Yeah, literally just finished it. Yeah, just submitted it.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's a massive weight off my shoulders because it's been definitely a long journey doing that.
My mum just submitted her master's dissertation and is starting her PhD, so I obviously kind of understand that pressure. But yeah, so I mean, I feel like this is something that, I don't know, maybe I know about it because I have studied it in various ways at university, so maybe I think that it's more common knowledge than it is, but I feel like there is some kind of dialogue around whiteness in medical areas, but could you perhaps explain that a little bit more and why you've chosen to make that the focus of your doctorate?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms more specifically of clinical psychology, it's been a real personal journey for me. So I had a lot of my own experiences around what we would call mental health and being in mental health services as a young person. And through that journey, what I've experienced is being faced with a lot of white female therapists who are the dominant demographic of clinical psychology in this country. That it's an 88% white demographic.
Wow.
And it's 80% female. So as a young woman of colour, negotiating things around my faith, my sexuality, my mental health, I often felt quite misunderstood. And having to almost explain a lot of things that I didn't really have the resources to offer explanations for, let alone process my own distress on top of that, if that makes sense. So I found that really tiring and quite exhausting. And that's just kind of my own personal experience of whiteness, which then I guess pushed me towards my journey towards the profession, but then going through my journey as a trainee, understanding that demographic not manifested just physically through white bodies in the profession, but also through the knowledge structures. What we're taught is often by white authors. The literature we read is very Eurocentric and Western knowledge and understandings of our distress. So it's very much kind of sat with this scientific understanding of our pain and suffering, and that the solutions are often through our brain or biochemicals or through individual kind of cognitive therapies, rather than looking broader outside of that Western framework to other spiritual understandings maybe, or thinking about community healing or different ways of making sense of our experiences that don't sit within that framework. So for me, I think it was really trying the importance of holding up the mirror on how whiteness manifests in all these different ways, actually on a demographic of people that are seeking help, especially in London, in this country, that aren't often white, that have very different sense makings of their experiences, and who are often undergoing a lot of harm by the system. So actually, if we're thinking about it kind of more anecdotally, black men are going through the system are way significantly more likely to be medicated, to be over-medicated, to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act, to be given a diagnosis of psychosis. So there's a lot of ways that racism is playing out to black communities, if we're talking about it from statistics and numbers. So institutional racism is playing out in so many different ways. And I think I just wanted to shed a light on that and to kind of investigate that a bit deeper, because there had been no research in whiteness and clinical psychology so far from the perspective of the dominant demographic, which is white females. So that's kind of where it all sits for me. So I think that's a bit of a long-winded answer to your question, but there's a lot to it.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, and it's something that I've come across kind of briefly in some of my, I did a criminology module, where it's kind of come up, but it seems the sort of thing that is brushed over. So it's really interesting to have a deeper kind of insight into it. And I know, I think I read that you've done some meditation. Is that part of kind of those broader kind of experiences of ways of healing that you were just talking about?
Yeah, meditation's been really key for me. And I think it translates into everything, because what underpins meditation for me is just basically being awake to life. And meditation is a way of practicing that, because it is very much a practice of waking up to your breath and to your body.
Yeah.
And it's something that has been, like, I've been going on retreats now to help kind of build a foundation to my practice for a while, but coming into it, it's something that I find like I really need to integrate into every day for me, so that I don't get caught up in terms of like busy mind and and thoughts that really take me away from my relationships and from being able to give myself fully to my work. And even as a kind of like growing therapist and psychologist, it's so important to be present and to be with the people that you're with, like, fully. And I think what kind of sits under being loving is being fully present. And that's why I think for me meditation is a really core foundation in the practice of love, because how can you be fully loving if you're not awake to the people that you want to demonstrate love to, or to this life that you want to be loving towards or give loving service towards, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I guess broadly speaking, like, it's just really, really fundamental to the way that I live and to the way that I work.
It's really interesting. It's like, a lot of people say, oh, you should meditate because it will like help you sleep or it will clear your mind, and it's a really interesting kind of different perspective on it. That's I think a lot more interesting.
Because I think actually the myth of it clearing your mind, it's not to clear your mind. It's to waking up to what's in your mind. It's not, the idea isn't that you meditate your thoughts away. It's you're meditating to notice them and to take a step back and be with your breath, so that when you notice, those thoughts coming and passing, that you can meet that with acceptance and compassion, rather than being completely like getting lost in them and identifying yourself with them, if that makes sense. Like, thoughts will always be there, and it's more kind of cultivating a more loving and awake relationship to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's actually something that I felt like I needed to hear, because everyone's constantly telling me to meditate, and I'm always like, oh, I can't meditate, I'm rubbish at it, I can never stop thinking. But if you look at it from that perspective, I might give it another shot and see what happens.
Yeah, do it. For sure.
So, I know that you've filmed a poem that's going live for Mental Health Awareness Week, is that right?
Yeah. And how do you know that?
Because Ariane told me.
Okay, cool.
Just when she sent me your number, she said, by the way, are we not meant to talk about it? Is it a secret?
No, it's fine. We can talk about it. It's going live next week. That's fine,
yeah, so can you tell me a bit about that?
So that poem is... It's very much about embracing our madness, basically, and our distress. And I think I wrote it very much about my own experiences, but what I wanted to highlight underneath it links to a campaign that I did a while back called 4 and 4, which is, I think this is a bit of a bigger conversation, but looking critically at how we understand our pain and distress. At the moment, we often use language like illness and around diagnosis to understand the things that are going on in terms of our pain and distress. Like, a lot of understanding our mental health is around that. And what I wanted to demonstrate with this poem is that there is a way that we can move away from this individualistic understanding of our pain that locates this problem within our brain and under these labels, to a more accepting understanding of our distress being expressed in lots of different ways, and actually embracing our madness allows us to look more from a collective and community perspective at ways that we can heal each other and embrace what's going on with each other. That doesn't rely on services, that doesn't rely on medication, that doesn't rely on labels.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I wanted the poem to speak to. And also just highlight how diagnosis has been used in the past in quite problematic ways, and the poem speaks to this a little bit. You know, how homosexuality used to be a disorder in the DSM back in the day, and diagnoses like drapetomania have been used for runaway slaves. You know, that political use of diagnosis has been quite oppressive, and actually just really sort of draw attention to that through this poem, as well as the importance of embracing our madness in all the ways that it comes.
Is that embracing our magnus, like Magnus?
No, madness, MAD. Yeah.
Who's Magnus? Embracing our madness sounds good. I've always been a bit mad, so I think.
Yeah, I think that's it really. Like, how can we deal with each other's pain, however that presents itself? You know, whether that is complete isolation, or how someone might understand as being depressed, or whether that is that we become so consumed with it, that with our pain, that it means it affects the way that we eat, or affects the way that it manifests in our bodies through weight, or in different other ways, or through self-harm and cutting ourselves, or whatever that is. It doesn't need labels, that we can actually turn towards each other's pain in a way, rather than moving away from it and sending people to doctors. I think, like, yes, there is room for that, and yes, like, people, you know, may find healing in those ways too, but there is also ways that we can look to each other, you know, in our families, in our friends, and in communities and schools, etc., and, you know, that we can turn to each other more. I think there's room for us to grow with that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it sounds really kind of like the ideal. I just wonder kind of how we get there, but talking about it is definitely a good first step, and hopefully, I don't know, I feel like a big part of it is still the stigma, unfortunately.
And I think this is the whole thing. I think from where I'm trying to come from with this poem, I think where a lot of my work around the 4-in-4 campaign stems from is, I think awareness raising is really important as a first step, because I think really how we've tried to address the stigma so far is through the language of mental illness, by being like, it's okay, you know, it's just like a broken leg, you know, and likening our experiences of distress to illness as a way of destigmatizing. And I think although that's very well intended, what it does is then means that the only way we can talk about it is through the language of illness and labels.
Yeah.
And what I'm hoping to do through this poem and through the campaign is saying, actually, we can talk about our distress. And yes, it is really important to destigmatize, but we need to also be mindful about the language that we're using, and to move away from understanding our experiences as just being located in the brain that can be cured by pills, as to thinking about what's actually happening to people on a broader societal and social structural level that is making us feel this way, and is making us feel this pain and distress, as well as looking to those places to find healing as well.
I guess that's particularly pertinent at the moment, considering the national and global situation we find ourselves in, what with, you know, isolation and lockdown, even though supposedly it has somewhat eased today, kind of, I think, increasing the mental health difficulties, if you will, that a lot of people are facing at the moment. And Ariane said something about you kind of were looking at how whiteness was manifesting with COVID. Was that something you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this is I think it's a really big issue. I'm just thinking about where to start with this for you, because I think there's loads in it.
Yeah, no worries. It's a big question. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I think what the virus is doing at the moment is it's unveiling structural and racial inequality in a way that we can't hide anymore under the myth of a post-racial society. You know, we've been told there's this idea going around that the virus doesn't discriminate. You know, I think actually that's very misleading and fundamentally it's a lie, because actually clearly what's sitting underneath this, and what the difficult question that we have to confront as a society is, Black and brown people are being significantly more affected by this. 68% of NHS staff who have died in the pandemic were Black and brown, you know, and I don't think that's being highlighted enough. We're hearing a lot about key workers, we're hearing a lot about NHS staff, which is quite neutral language and discourse, you know. We're also hearing about heroes, and in reality what's underneath that is Black and brown working class people who have no choice but to keep going to work. And I think there's a lot in us questioning this framing of heroes. You know, are they heroes or are they actually hostages? You know, people are being forced to do things because they have no choice. You know, I think the conversation around this is a lot about class, and people are talking about, you know, the economic situation for some people that are having to be forced into work. But the reality is that labour is very much racialised and gendered, and the people that are in that bracket are often Black and brown. And that's what we're seeing in terms of the deaths. And even right now, you know, what we have is some statistics leaking through, and it's coming. We're having to look at it, you know, and be confronted with it more directly through, you know, what's happened with Belly Majinga. And I don't know if you've heard about that coming up in the news recently. The woman who.
Yes.
Have you heard about her?
I think I have, but just in case anyone hasn't.
Yeah, sure. No, I can. So she's a mother who went. She was terrified of going into work. She was working at Victoria Station, and you know, for TFL. And she was terrified of going in without any PPE, and was raising that as an issue. And she didn't want to leave the ticket counter, but she was you know, basically forced to go out of the ticket counter, and she was spat on by a man who had the virus in a racially violent attack, and she contracted COVID and died. You know, leaving an 11-year-old daughter behind. And people are calling this, you know, in the news at the moment, as being called a tragic incident. But I really don't think we should be calling this anything other than a racist murder. And it's brought up for me reflections on how accustomed we are to seeing the death of Black and brown people in the global South more broadly, but even, you know, now, like, how accustomed are we? And it brings to question, you know, whose bodies do we really value? And whose bodies and whose lives do we value? Because really what it feels like right now is that Black and brown bodies are disposable in COVID, and it's incredibly painful and difficult. And I think this is, you know, I guess what I'm speaking to is the question you asked me was, how is whiteness manifesting? Well, this is it, you know. Are the lives that we value Black and brown lives, or are they white lives? And there's a lot of racial violence that underpins this, and it's incredibly heartbreaking. And I think what some of the language around it is doing, and the heroism narrative is doing, is making us turn our heads away from what the government are actually playing a part in and perpetuating in terms of racial violence, and not offering the support, the financial support to make sure that people are staying at home, or that people are having the equipment that they need to be safe in the environments that they're being forced to go into. And it's, you know, it does feel like a bit of a distraction technique from what's really going on. So yeah, sorry, I feel like I've just gone on and off on a bit of a rant there, but yeah.
No, I think
that's kind of...
I think this is something that people, including me, really need to hear, and I hope that, like, when this goes up, people can read this and see a different perspective. You know, it's all well and good that, you know, a lot of people, including me, are avoiding the news a lot, because it can be quite, in many ways, difficult to see at the moment, and kind of it's easy to bury yourself in your own little bubble in lockdown and kind of pretend it's not happening, but the truth is that there's still people suffering kind of disproportionately, and I hope that this kind of opens people's eyes to that, because it definitely has opened mine more than they were. So thank you for that and for sharing that. And off the record, on behalf of white people, I'm really sorry. Some of us are okay, I promise.
Yeah. But I think what's important, and I don't know if you want to put it in there, but I think there is a bigger question, and this is also what my thesis speaks to, is that whiteness is not necessarily synonymous with white people, and it's important about recognising like structural oppression, processes that are happening that yes, white people can embody and white people do privilege from, and white people can reinforce, but there is also room there for white people to reflect and to take action, to address these issues, and I think that it is important, because I think sometimes if the assumption, I guess what I'm trying to say is like that blurry line, that overlap where people think these two things can't be pulled apart, can sometimes actually make people feel hopeless and that there's nothing they can do and feel a bit stuck. And actually I think that there is space in between those two things, and it's really important to name that as well.
Yeah, I should hope so. Okay, cool. So I guess just as a final thing to bring it back a little bit to the poetry kind of art side of things, something that we ask all of our interviewees on their way out is kind of what advice, and I suppose this is maybe in a context where it can be directly applicable to now, but also more generally, what advice would you give to young people who are kind of looking to get into the arts, maybe particularly in spoken word, but in any capacity? Kind of what advice would you give them on how to approach it, and what best ways to kind of get into that life path, I suppose?
Oh, big question.
I know, I've asked you lots of big questions.
Advice? I don't want to be really cheesy about it, but I feel like what comes to me more immediately is just coming as you are and being true to yourself. Yeah. I think that we're living in a especially at a time where social media is so active and it's so easy to kind of work in this comparative mindset where you're looking at what other people are doing and comparing yourself to that and whether you're good enough in that way. And I think it's really important to limit that so that you can honour your own journey and work out really what it is that you want to say and what you have to offer the world, and what you want, where the urgency is in your message, like what feels like a really urgent thing to say, what feels like it's really in service of you and other people, and just trying to honour that as much as you possibly can, and I think what helps me anyway is coming back to how urgent is this, is this something that needs to be heard and needs to be said, and that helps me refine what I'm sharing, but also does this feel true to who I really am, and what is the purpose of that? And I think for me, coming from very much a faith background and a spiritual background, I'm often asking, is this in loving relationship, of my relationship with God, and am I in loving service of God? And that's where I come back to. And I know that won't apply to everybody, but that does help me. And I think it's just working out what your own message is and what your own journey is with that, and trying to stay true to that and honour that. But yeah, just hide yourself away from all of the competitive capitalist productivity frameworks as much as you can, because your value is deeper than that, and much more than what you're producing and what it looks like. Is staying true to who you are and making sense of who you are underneath that is really important.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sanah. That is amazing. thanks so much for listening to this interview. If you've enjoyed it, then please do subscribe, as we have more fantastic interviews like this coming your way in the next few weeks and months. You can also read the transcript of this interview on voicemag.uk, where we also have loads of other amazing content, including interviews with other inspirational people within the arts. If you're looking for another podcast to listen to at the moment, then Voice Extra does a podcast where the Voice contributors discuss the articles that they have been writing that week, and it's fascinating stuff, so please also check that out.